welcome. I'm so glad you joined me. My name is Patty Dunn, and I have some exciting things to show you today. The first segment we're going to do is on facing in a different direction. And I have some pictures that I want to show you of some great blouses that I've done with facing toward the outside. So let's take a look. Here's a blouse that I've put the facing to the outside and did a decorative edge to it. And then we have a blue blouse that has the decorative edge in a woolly nylon thread, and it gives a little bit more of a accent to the edge. And then we have a green blouse, which I have changed the facing length, and it's caused it to be more decorative and much more fancy with some decorative stitching around it. And so now let's talk about what we do for these facings in order to change them. The first thing that happens is you get your facing, and it's usually pretty shallow looking. This is a regular facing that you're going to find on most blouses, and we're going to talk about a blouse first. And so what you might want to do, of course on the first two blouses I just used that same facing, but what you might want to do is change the facing by making it a little wider, going ahead and going all the way to the shoulder line, and then also extending it down a little bit. And this way you have a little more to work with. Then if you wanted to get even more decorative, you might go and do the same technique, but then just make a little special line, making it a little bit longer on one side than the other. This is a really popular look right now for different things that we're seeing in the stores. And the one thing that I do want to point out to you is always bear in mind that you have a seam allowance, so that's where you're actually going to start that line. Otherwise, if you start it right there at the very corner, you're going to end up losing more than you think. So bear in mind that your seam allowance are involved. And also, don't come too far down below the side of the blouse, below the arm eye, because you may end up getting a little bit too much weight in the bust area and it won't lay as nicely. Now let's talk about a jacket. I think we're going to talk a little more about a jacket this morning because I think that's one of the fun things that we can do. Here's the jacket facing, where the facing is, again, a little bit narrow. But if you were to change the colors and things, you get a real pretty look to a jacket. Now here is where I have actually extended the shoulder line just a little bit, and not all the way to the shoulder like I did on the other blouse. And then you can also incorporate the arm's eye in this too. If you wanted to go ahead and bring this facing out, you can also use the arm's eye, and then you've ended up with some a little more decoration on it. So this makes it very interesting. Now let's talk about the back. Now we have the back facing, and this again is a blouse. And the one thing that you do want to remember now is that you need to match the front facing and the back facing the same length so that they're going to meet. So if you extended this on the front, then you also need to extend it on the back as far as the width of the shoulder. Now here's another idea for making a little bit more of a decorative back. You might make it a little longer or just do it a little curvy, but you've got a great palette that you can use in this area with decorative stitches. You could use a different fabric. There's all kinds of ways that you can use this. And then when you get to the cuff on a jacket, if you wanted to use this for a cuff, always fold your pattern in half. And this is the same thing about a facing. And that way you can get a great line, but you're always even on both sides. So anytime you do a pattern like that, you want to put it on the fold, and then you know that you are even with both sides. Okay, now the next thing that you want to do with this facing is definitely interface. If you don't put some stability underneath this, it's not going to take the weight to the front and really make a nice, clean, crisp edge. And we have so many different kinds of interfacings out there. You certainly have choices for your fabrics, and sometimes you have heavier fabric and you want a heavier interfacing. Sometimes you have lighter, you need lighter interfacing. And then there's fusibles out there. And one thing about fusibles is that they need to be compatible with the fabric. So if you have a fusible and it bubbles or it's causing you some problems, you might want to use a woven fabric, woven interfacing. So then you would want to put it on the fabric just like you would, the facing just like you would a regular woven. And the one thing that I like to use is a adhesive spray whenever I'm working with something that's not fusible, because then it gives it a little bit of stability and stays in the place that it's supposed to. So those are great products. We've got so many neat products now that we have on the market that help us with sewing. Makes it so much easier than it used to be. This is one of the illustrations I have now for if you wanted to finish the edge of this facing and it's a woven instead of a iron-on fusible. You would stitch along. This is half the facing. I've just done half of the facing. You put the seam allowances together at the shoulder, and then you will stitch around the edge and you will trim very close. That is so important to trim, because when you're around a curve, that fabric is not going to turn in unless you do a real good job of trimming. So don't leave much there for trimming. And then, as you can see from this sample, you're going to end up with a nice clean edge once you go and press that down. So that's one way to finish the edge. Now there's another way to finish the edge that I like, and that's using trims. And we have several samples of trims here that you could use. Here's a corded piping, and this is just a regular little store-bought piping. Here's a rickrack. That's a great look too. I'm going to show you something about rickrack a little later that you'll enjoy seeing. And then here's just a bias tape. All this is just a tape that was pre-folded, and I actually took the fold out and placed it on the center fold and pressed it again. And then that gives a real nice flat edge. And then this right here is actually the edge of the fabric, the selvage of the fabric. Believe it or not, you can make some very interesting edges for the garment with that selvage that comes on the edge of some of these, especially some of these jacket fabrics. So as you can see, this is like a houndstooth fabric, and then it almost looks like it's got a stripe to it. So you've got the colors and everything, same fabrics. And then here is a piping that I made on the serger, and all this is a bias tape. And I've gone to the serger and I've done a little rolled hem along the edge, and then it's used and inserted just like piping. So this makes a nice little edge too. So now let's talk about how we get this onto the facing. The first thing you're going to do is lay the right side of the piping or whatever you're going to use to the right side of the facing. And of course, I have put the shoulder seams together. And then you're going to stitch all the way around the outside of this facing. And then once you get that finished, you're going to go ahead and press. And that's so important. Again, you're going to press under this seam allowance so that there is the edge and it's nice and flat. And see, it's all finished for you. And so now let's take a look at a jacket that I made with this technique for the outside selvage. This is a jacket I made, and there is an inserted zipper in it. And if you can see what a flattering line it is, I used the cuff and I inserted the selvage edge in that. Now let's take a look at how we're going to put the facing onto the garment. This is a little backwards from what you're used to, but if you just remember that it's going to be the wrong side of the jacket and the right side of the right side down of the facing. So the facing is going to be right side against the wrong side of the jacket. And what I like to do is understitch. And that always makes my lines, my edge of the seam allowance look real nice and clean. And so what I'm going to do is just do the front only of this jacket. I'm just going to stitch down the front, and then I'm going to understitch. So I do both of the fronts, and then I understitch. And then I will come back, and then I will stitch the neckline. And I've only done half of this for you so you can see. But then you're going to be stitching the neckline of this. And you see the wrong side again. We're doing this on the wrong side. And then you will end up turning the facing to the right side, and then you will bring this to the front. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the bottom edge here, because there is a little bit of difference that you need to do on this. When you get down to the bottom, and normally you have your hem line here that will extend. So the facing, usually it looks like straight over, and then it drops down for your hem. You want to go ahead and stitch all the way down and over to the edge of the facing. So here it is on the body of the jacket. Okay, now you're going to stop and you're going to make a slash right here so that when you turn this, this is going to be able to turn up this way, and this will be able to turn down that way. So this is actually going to turn in opposite directions. So you want to make a slash right there in that seam line right there. Okay, so we're just rolling right along, and see how easy this is? Boy, you can whip one of these up so quickly. It's really great. Now what I want to show you is after you turn the jacket, you're going to the outside, you're going to end up, of course, press again, but you're going to just stitch in the ditch all the way around. So do you see how I ended up stitching in the ditch, and then here is the understitching on this side. I haven't finished this one up. Okay, now here is this part where I was talking about where the hem is, and you've got to clip in, and then what happens is this will turn up instead of back with the facing. So do you see why I have to have a nice little slash in this so that I can turn that the other way? Okay, now let's go over to the serger and let's take a look at how we set the serger up and talk a little bit about some threads that we can use. We have a lot of options out there for great looking thread that will cover the edge and make it more decorative. We've got some corded threads, and this is a variegated, which is really pretty on some things. If you want to make the thread more enhancing than the fabric's real plain. Or here's some woolly nylon. Actually, it's woolly nylon with a variegated thread in it, a variegated metallic thread in it. And it's really nice to use if you want a little glitz on something. And then this is a woolly nylon thread. You can see how the puffiness, it's all fluffy, and it's wonderful to put in there to fill in an edge so that it looks real decorative. Almost looks like piping sometimes when you use that. Now, let's talk about how we set up our serger. I'm going to use this just like a regular serger, but only with one needle in, but my wider stitch width. So my needle is in the left-hand side, and my right needle is not in. And I put 3 threads. These are sulky threads. These are regular rayon threads in my upper looper. because that's the one that's showing, and I've got just regular thread in the needle and the lower looper. You do want to remember that your needle thread and your looper thread are going to show to the top side because they're going to come just a little bit to the top. But the main thing that's going to show is your upper looper. So we want to be sure that we set our upper looper so that it's nice and flat. And so I'm just going to show you, as you go around this curve, how pretty, if you just follow and notice how I need to straighten up my fabric over here. I actually put some easing here to come into that curve, and that way I don't lose the fabric. Sometimes you lose the fabric if you don't do that. And if you'll notice what a pretty edge that makes. And that's actually what I did on this blouse. And then what you would do after you get finished with this edge is just flat sew it to the garment. And that's the way it looks. And see how pretty that is with that rayon thread? And because there's 3 threads in there, it's become thick enough so that it actually has it covers the edge, and there's not the fabric is not peeking through. That's basically how I did this blouse that you saw earlier. And the thing about this blouse is that all you did was you brought the facing to the front, and then all you do is just flat straight stitch this down. So it's not turned under or anything. It's just used the decorative thread and used it for the finish. And with the extra body in there because of the interfacing, you can do all kinds of things. You've got all the options for decorative stitches. You've got just endless ways that you can use this.